It's the early 90s, and the people of Venezuela are frustrated with the democratic system in power. It was accused of building wealth off Venezuela's vast oil reserve, whilst its people faced a decline in living standards. By 1994, 51% of the households in Venezuela lived below the poverty line, and there was no hope for situation becoming any better. Key issues revolving unemployment, weak governance, and failed industrial policies took the front stage. Several coups were attempted by socialist movements to overthrow the government during its time in power, with the country behind it, but none resulted in success. Venezuela became a nation, longing for a savior, a void which was filled by Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Chavez. His message was clear: Venezuela needs a radical change, and it needs it now. The message resonated with the masses and attracted support all over the country. After a popular and successful campaign in 1998, Hugo Chavez won presidency and propelled onto the highest seat in the government of Venezuela. Once in office, Hugo Chavez vowed to his promise of actioning a significant shift in the country's political order, a shift which would bring socialism to the 21st century. He adopted an anti-American stance, which was inspired by his communist friend in Cuba, Fidel Castro, and Simon Bolivar, known as El Libertador. Simon Bolivar was the 19th century liberator of the Americas, as he led the independence of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia from the Spanish Empire, all whilst advocating for unity in Latin America, anti-imperialism. Chavez's first orders as president was to take state control over the country's key industries: oil, gas, telecommunications, mining, and construction, promising that the generated revenue would contribute towards protecting national sovereignty and funding an expansive social welfare program. With Venezuela having one of the largest proven oil reserves, he wanted to spread the wealth amongst the people, and for it to be invested into its key sectors. Whilst at first, the changes brought by the nationalization of the oil sector did in fact help in funding social programs and initially reduce poverty, critics argued that the economy was heavily reliant on oil revenues and lacked diversification. The growing power of the government, from its tightening of the country's resources, had the country divided. While some saw the move as vital to challenge entrenched elites and foreign influence, others expressed concerns over its weakening institutional checks and corruption as the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. Further criticism was aimed at Chavez's approach to media censorship. By using a combination of legislative changes and closure of independent news outlets, he was able to achieve a communicational monopoly and silence opposing voices. This raised concerns. Were the people of Venezuela being stripped off their right of free speech? Hugo Chavez was very vocal about his anti-American stance.
I think that the first people who should read this book are our brothers and sisters in the United States, because their threat is in their own house. The devil is right at home. The devil himself is right in the house.
It led to Venezuela building alliances with countries who shared social communist values and were adversaries to U.S. ideologies. The approach was a clear indication of Chavez's shift in political position, upholding socialist beliefs and being the voice of anti-imperialism. These became the foundation blocks under which President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, would be heavily influenced on later in his career. Born in 1962, from a Venezuelan father who was a trade union leader and Colombian mother who was a teacher, Nicolas Maduro grew from a working middle-class home. In 1986, at the age of 24, he spent a year of political training ran by the Union of Young Communists in Cuba. This became a formative period where Maduro would develop strong ideological orientation and long-standing relationship with Cuban intelligence and key figures, empowering the young minds shaping the future of Cuba. Once back from training, he became a bus driver for the Caracas metro system for 7 years until he climbed the ranks and followed in his father's footsteps by founding and leading the Caracas Metro Workers Trade Union in 1991, where he became a central figure for labor rights. Being a man of the people Nicolas Maduro felt aligned with Hugo Chávez's commitment to change in the country, so much so that in 1994, he would become one of the earliest members of the Fifth Republic movement, Movimiento V Republica, the political vehicle behind Hugo Chávez's 1998 presidential bid. The movement, a socialist party headed by Hugo himself, was a success. And after winning the 1998 elections, Hugo Chávez appointed Nicolas Maduro as a member of the National Constituent Assembly, where under the president's supervision was a body elected to draft a new constitution. Following the 1999 national referendum, Hugo Chávez became a mentor to Maduro, and during their years at the assembly, they developed a relationship defined by loyalty and a shared vision for the future of Venezuela. So what were the key changes to the new constitution? Well, under the new constitution, there was dissolution of power. Venezuelans' two-body Congress, which was made up of the Senate and Chamber of Deputies, was to be replaced by the National Assembly, which would prove easier to control and influence. Presidency terms were extended from 5 to 6 years, with the possibility of immediate re-election. And under given conditions, the National Assembly had power to dismiss opposing leading judges and officials. Changes were brought under the premise that the previous Constitution of 1961 was written by a corrupt system of elitists who were disconnected from the working class. In 2006, after 7 years at the Assembly, Maduro was appointed by yet again Hugo Chávez to become the Minister of Foreign Affairs. His tenure as a foreign minister was defined by the aggressive critiquing of the USA and its government, whilst promotion of an anti-West coalition with countries such as Russia, China, and Iran. In the fall of 2012, after winning his fourth term as president, Hugo Chávez rewarded Nicolas Maduro's loyalty and appointed him to the second highest seat in the country, executive vice president. This was a short-lived appointment, as, tragically, only a few months later, in March of 2013, Hugo Chávez died at the age of 58 due to complications from cancer. This was a moment of deep pain for Nicolas Maduro, one which he described as a historical tragedy. He went on to accuse the U.S. government of inducing the cancer, whilst delivering a public eulogy vowing to Hugo Chávez's revolutionary, anti-imperialist, and socialist legacy. A month following his death, the new president was announced. Nicolas Maduro won the seat by slim margin against leader of the center-right political party Justice First, Henrique Capriles, with just over 51% of the polls in his favor. Inheriting Hugo Chávez's principles, Nicolas Maduro carried the torch, managing Venezuela-U.S. relations with an iron fist. He framed his policies as a necessary bulwark against Yankee imperialism. The new president immediately expelled U.S. diplomats, labeling them historical enemies, and accusing them of orchestrating plots to sabotage the nation's electrical grid, economy, and stability. Maduro frequently condemned the Monroe Doctrine, the long-standing U.S. policy that positioned any external intervention in the Americas as a potential hostile act. He regarded it as an unfair assertion of U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. In Venezuela, Maduro labeled opposition parties as traitors, working toward a divided country. His tight grip on key state institutions proved deeply unpopular as the promised change never materialized. This period was marked by some of the largest and most violent protests in modern Latin American history. Uprisings were widespread across the country, calling for his resignation and blaming the regime for a collapsing economy, rampant corruption, and widespread election rigging. Plummeting in popularity, Maduro made a controversial move in 2017. He created a pro-government constituent assembly. Publicly, he claimed its primary purpose was restoring peace and fixing Venezuela's crippling economic model. However, critics and international observers universally saw this as a calculated power grab designed specifically to bypass and overtake the opposition-controlled National Assembly. The newly created assembly wasted no time. On the 18th of August 2017, it declared itself a supra-constitutional body, claiming supreme power over all other branches of the government. This included the National Assembly, which was later formally stripped of its legislative power, rendering the opposition effectively powerless. The creation of the Constituent Assembly by Nicolas Maduro was a primary trigger for one of the most intense and sustained periods of protests in 2017. Lasting 4 months, these demonstrations tragically resulted in over 120 deaths at the hands of Venezuelan forces, accompanied by widespread reports of torture and unfair arrests. Western nations, many Latin American countries, and the European Union largely condemned the use of force against protesters and the deaths that occurred. The United States issued strong statements calling for an end to the violence and threatening sanctions against Venezuelan officials deemed responsible for human rights violations. As the economy kept tanking, the human cost became devastatingly clear. Majority of the 30 million citizens of Venezuela faced chronic shortages, food scarcity, and became victims of crippling hyperinflation. Against this backdrop of national crisis, in 2018, Maduro was declared re-elected for a second 6-year term. Many immediately criticized the legitimacy of this election, with the USA, Spain, and other countries refusing to recognize the results. Nicolas Maduro had adopted various tactics to manipulate the course of the election. He called for the elections to be moved to May, much earlier than the traditional prescribed December date, giving the opposition little time to organize. He officially banned the largest opposition parties from running for election, and he forced prominent figures who would dare to challenge his government into imprisonment and exile. The people of Venezuela were again not impressed by Maduro's tactics. In an attempt to sabotage the elections, the lowest voter turnout in Venezuela's democratic era was recorded. Following his challenging 6-year term, which brought further instability to the country, the 2024 elections were fast approaching. These elections would prove to be a pivotal moment, the catalyst that would ultimately lead to the collapse of the Maduro government. Nicolas Maduro's strategy was simple: maintain power by hook or by crook, regardless of overwhelming evidence of low domestic support. He continued disqualifying his primary opponents and imposed a 15-year ban on popular opposition nominee Maria Corina Machado. He went as further as revoking the invitation for European Union election observers to oversee the process of election in the country. During his own campaign rallies, he issued dark warnings to the nation, cautioning of bloodbath.
If you don't want Venezuela to fall into bloodshed in a fratricidal civil war because of the fascists, then let's guarantee the biggest electoral success in the electoral history of our people.
Following the contentious election, the refusal to publicly display the tally sheets was met with widespread outrage. Protesters immediately challenged the credibility of the results. In response, Maduro launched a terrifying crackdown he called Operation Tun Tun, translating to Operation Knock Knock. Security forces began a systematic campaign, going door to door to arrest activists, poll workers, and critics. The scale of the repression was staggering. Over 2,000 people were detained as a direct result. Ultimately, these fraudulent 2024 results triggered a profound and deep political crisis, plunging the nation into further turmoil. After Donald Trump returned to office and began his second term in 2025, he immediately upped the ante against the Venezuelan leader. After his inauguration in January 2025, President Trump declared illegal immigration a national emergency.
We're very unhappy with Venezuela. Because of what they've done. They've emptied their prisons into our country. And by invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities.
Officially designating Venezuelan gangs as foreign terrorist organizations. By August 2025, the U.S. military began a significant buildup in the southern Caribbean Sea, deploying warships and personnel just off the Venezuelan coast. By year's end, Trump authorized fatal strikes on Venezuelan vessels in the Caribbean, alleged to be trafficking drugs. He publicly declared an armed conflict against the drug cartels, accusing Maduro of working with them and calling his government a criminal enterprise. Trump's final call for Maduro's resignation came in December 2025 when he initiated a maritime blockade, seizing oil tankers from Venezuela and issuing an ultimatum: comply or face intensified military pressure. Maduro publicly rejected it all. The world watched, stunned, as U.S. special agents and Delta Force operatives ascended into Caracas territory. After a 2-hour exchange of fire, Nicolas Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores were abducted and flown to the U.S. to face trial on federal charges: narco-terrorism, cocaine importation, and possession of machine guns. The pair pleaded not guilty at their first hearing and will remain in custody until next set hearing in March 2026. In a stunning statement, President Donald Trump declared the U.S. was now in charge of Venezuela until suitable replacement was found. With no clear indication of the country's direction, the future hangs precariously in the balance. The outcome of this unprecedented event remains uncertain. Only time will reveal the true impact on the Venezuelan people and their nation. Let us know in the comments your thoughts and subscribe for more.